reflection of me. Daphne tightened her grip on the steering wheel, biting her lip as she turned into the packed mall parking lot. It was mid-December and the air was thick with the energy of last-minute shoppers scrambling to check off their lists. She adjusted the heater, glancing at the dashboard clock. "Damn," she muttered, "I don't have time for this." Her family's annual Christmas party was just hours away, and she still hadn't found the perfect outfit. She scanned the rows of cars, desperate for an open spot, when her eyes landed on one up ahead. "Yes, finally," she smiled, signaling and rolling toward it. Just as she was about to pull in, a sleek black Dodge Charger zipped in front of her and slid into the spot. "What the? Are you serious?" Daphne slammed her palm against the horn, frustration bubbling over. The driver, a tall brown-skinned man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped out of the car and glanced her way. His expression was unapologetic, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Daphne rolled her window down. "Hey, that was my spot," she called out. The man shrugged, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. "You snooze, you lose," he said casually, smirking. She narrowed her eyes, muttering under her breath, as she drove off to find another space. Her heart pounded in irritation, but something about his cocky demeanor stuck with her. After what felt like forever, she found a spot at the far end of the lot. Grumbling to herself, she hurried into the mall. The festive decorations and cheerful music did little to lift her mood as she weaved through the crowds. Inside a boutique, Daphne was flipping through a rack of dresses when someone brushed past her, knocking a hanger from her hand. "Oops, my bad," a familiar voice said. She turned, her eyes locking on the same man from the parking lot. His smirk was now replaced with a sheepish grin. "You again?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Guilty." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier. It was instinct. You know how it is around here. Dog eat dog for parking spots." "Instinct?" Daphne crossed her arms, her lips curving into a sly smile. "You should let a lady go first. Didn't your mama teach you that?" The man laughed, his deep voice warm and inviting. "You got me there. I'm Emmanuel, by the way." He extended a hand. Daphne hesitated before shaking it. "Daphne." "Nice to meet you, Daphne." Emmanuel's grip was firm but gentle. "So, shopping for a party, or just battling the Christmas crowd for fun?" She tilted her head. "Family party, and you?" "Christmas gift for my niece. She's 6, loves dolls and dinosaurs. Figured I'd let her pick one out herself." "That's sweet," Daphne said, surprised by the soft side beneath his confident exterior. They chatted for a few more moments before going their separate ways, but as fate would have it, they ran into each other again at the gas station across the street. Daphne was filling up her tank when she noticed Emmanuel at the pump next to hers. He caught her eye and smiled, walking over. "Let me get that for you," he said, taking the pump from her hand. Daphne blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to. It's on me," Emmanuel interrupted, sliding his card into the machine. She watched as he pumped her gas, her lips curling into a small smile. "You're pretty slick, you know that?" He chuckled. "Gotta make up for stealing your spot somehow." As he handed her phone back, his number freshly saved, he said, "Text me sometime. Or don't. Your call." Daphne shook her head, laughing softly. "Thanks, I guess." Later that night, as she sat on her cousin's couch at the family party, her phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number lit up the screen. "Hey, it's Emmanuel." Her eyebrows shot up, and she glanced around the room as if someone had seen the message too. She hesitated, then typed back, "Wow, pretty fucking slick. LOL." The response came almost immediately. "I try. What's a guy gotta do to make you smile again?" And just like that, their night-long text conversation began. Daphne leaned back against the couch, her phone buzzing with every new message. Around her, the family party was in full swing. Her younger cousins darted around, squealing and chasing each other, while her aunt belted out carols off-key in the kitchen. The scent of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the air, but Daphne's attention was glued to the screen. Emmanuel. So did you find that perfect party outfit? She smirked and typed back. Daphne. Yep, red dress. Classic. What about you? Did your niece pick out her dinosaur or doll? His reply was almost instant. Emmanuel. Went with a T-Rex that roars. Gotta admit, I kinda want one for myself now. Daphne laughed quietly, her fingers hovering over the keys. There was something easy about talking to Emmanuel. He didn't seem like the type to overthink things or force the conversation. It just flowed naturally. Daphne. You're a big kid, huh? Emmanuel. Sometimes. What about you? Don't tell me you're one of those serious types who never have fun. Her lips twitched into a smile as she replied. Daphne. Depends on who I'm with. The 3 little dots signaling his response appeared, then disappeared. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. Emmanuel, that sounds like a challenge. Let me take you out tomorrow night. Let's see if I can bring out your fun side. Daphne hesitated. She barely knew him, but the thought of spending more time with Emmanuel intrigued her. Daphne, and where would we go? Emmanuel, waterfront. Just you, me, a bottle of something good, and the city lights. Daphne, smooth. You do this often? Emmanuel, only with parking spot rivals. She laughed out loud, earning a curious glance from her younger cousin. She rolled her eyes and quickly typed back. Daphne, fine, but you better bring the good stuff. Emmanuel, bet. I'll pick you up at 8. The next evening, Daphne stood in her cousin's driveway, nervously adjusting her coat. She hadn't been on a real date in months, and the thought of spending the evening alone with Emmanuel made her stomach flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. A sleek black Dodge Charger pulled up, its headlights slicing through the night. The passenger window rolled down, and Emmanuel leaned over with a grin. Ready? He asked. Daphne nodded, opening the door and sliding in. The car smelled faintly of leather and his cologne, warm, woodsy, and intoxicating. So, she said, fastening her seatbelt, what's the plan, Mr. Smooth? Emmanuel chuckled, pulling out of the driveway. Patience, you'll see. They drove in comfortable silence, the hum of the engine filling the gaps. As they approached the Camden waterfront, the city skyline came into view, its lights reflecting off the dark river. Emmanuel parked near the edge, grabbing a bag from the back seat before stepping out. What's in there? Daphne asked as he led her to a secluded bench overlooking the water. Essentials, he said, pulling out a bottle of Hennessy, 2 plastic cups, and a bag of gummy bears. She raised an eyebrow. Gummy bears? Trust me, they're the perfect chaser, Emmanuel said, pouring 2 drinks and handing her a cup. They clinked cups and took a sip, the warmth of the liquor spreading through Daphne's chest. For a while, they just sat there talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her job as an event planner and how she'd fallen into it, by accident after college. He shared stories about his niece and how he'd promised his mom he'd always look out for her. Sounds like a lot of responsibility, Daphne said, watching him. Emmanuel shrugged, swirling the liquid in his cup. It is, but it's family. You don't question it, you just do it. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She hadn't expected someone who seemed so laid back to have such depth. As the night wore on, the conversation turned playful. Emmanuel teased her about her obsession with holiday movies, while Daphne laughed at his inability to name more than 2 Christmas songs. They passed the bottle back and forth, the gummy bears disappearing one by one. At some point, Daphne felt his hand brush against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned to him, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "You're trouble, aren't you?" she said softly. Emmanuel grinned. "Only if you let me be." The space between them seemed to shrink, and before she knew it, his lips were on hers. The kiss was slow and deliberate, sending a shiver down her spine. When they finally pulled apart, Daphne exhaled shakily, her heart racing. "We should go," she said, though she didn't move. "Yeah," Emmanuel agreed, but neither of them made an effort to stand. Eventually, they made their way back to the car. The drive to her cousin's house was quiet, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. When they pulled into the driveway, Emmanuel shifted in his seat, looking at her. "You want me to come in?" he asked, his voice low. Daphne hesitated, her mind racing, but the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the world, made the decision for her. "Yeah," she said softly. "Come in." Daphne led Emmanuel into her cousin's house, the faint hum of laughter and music from the party still lingering in the air. Most of the family had gone home, leaving the living room dimly lit by the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. "Everyone's asleep," Daphne whispered, slipping off her coat. "You want something to drink? Water or just you?" Emmanuel interrupted, his voice deep and steady. Daphne paused, her breath catching. His eyes held hers, intense yet inviting, and for a moment all the noise in her head disappeared. "Come on," she said softly, leading him upstairs to the guest room she'd been staying in. Inside, the air felt warmer, heavier. Daphne sat down on the edge of the bed, watching as Emmanuel leaned against the door frame, his tall frame nearly filling the space. He pulled off his jacket and hung it on a nearby chair, then kicked off his sneakers with an ease that made her smile. "You're too comfortable already," she teased, trying to mask her nervousness. He chuckled, stepping closer. "You make it easy." The tension between them crackled like static electricity. When Emmanuel finally sat beside her, the mattress dipped slightly, and his presence was overwhelming, in the best way. "You good?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah." The first kiss was slow, as if they had all the time in the world, Then the kiss deepened, turning into something hungrier, more desperate. Emmanuel caressed Daphne's curves as they kissed passionately. His hands roamed over her soft skin, cupping her breasts and teasing her nipples to hardness. Daphne moaned into his mouth, grinding her hips against his growing erection. "I want you so fucking bad," Emmanuel growled, nipping at her neck. His hands settled on her waist, pulling her closer. Daphne's heart raced as Emmanuel's fingers traced along her inner thigh. His touch sent shivers through her body, igniting a fire deep in her core. She let out a soft moan as his hand moved higher, teasing her most sensitive areas through the thin fabric of her panties. "Fuck, you're so wet already," Emmanuel whispered, his voice husky with desire. He captured her lips in a searing kiss as he slowly peeled off her underwear. Daphne's fingers fumbled with his belt buckle. Clothes fell away piece by piece, hands exploring newly exposed flesh. Emmanuel's dick stood fully erect, pre-cum glistening at the tip. Daphne's pussy was already slick with arousal. Emmanuel laid her back on the bed, trailing kisses down her body. He licked and sucked at her breasts before continuing lower. Daphne gasped as his tongue found her clit, circling and flicking the sensitive nub. He slid 2 fingers inside her. "I need you inside of me," Daphne moaned. Emmanuel didn't need to be told twice. His hand trembled as he slowly guides his hard, throbbing dick towards her glistening pussy. He can see her wetness as Daphne spreads her legs wider in anticipation. Emmanuel presses the head of his shaft against her entrance, watching as her lips part to welcome him in. And soon they were tangled in the sheets, exploring each other with a passion neither of them had anticipated. The sympathy of moans and groans escaped their lips. It wasn't just about the physical, it was the way Emmanuel whispered her name like a secret, the way Daphne traced the lines of his back as if committing them to memory. Afterwards, they lay together in the dark, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Do you do this often?" she asked, her tone playful but curious. "What, steal parking spots or having epic nights with beautiful women?" She smirked, pinching his side. "You know what I mean." Emmanuel tilted his head to look at her, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on her back. "Not like this," he said simply. His honesty surprised her. She didn't respond, instead letting the quiet moments stretch between them. For the first time in a long time, she felt at ease. They both start drifting off to sleep. Emmanuel rises and gets out of bed. He gathers his things and gets dressed to head home for the night. Before he closes the door, he looks back at Daphne, still wrapped in the covers with one leg hanging out. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Emmanuel whispered. Daphne nodded her head on the pillow. "Yes," she said softly. Over the next few weeks, Emmanuel and Daphne were inseparable. What had started as playful banter over text quickly grew into something deeper. They spent hours on the phone, sharing stories about their pasts, their families, their dreams. Daphne learned that Emmanuel had grown up in Trenton, raised by a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. His father had been in and out of his life, leaving Emmanuel to step into a protector role for his younger siblings and later his niece. Despite the weight he carried, there was a lightness to him, a sense of humor and an ability to find joy in the small things. Emmanuel, in turn, was captivated by Daphne's independence and ambition. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, where her family had always been close-knit, but sometimes overbearing. She'd learned early on how to stand on her own 2 feet, carving out a career for herself as an event planner. Their dates became more frequent, more intimate. Sometimes they'd grab cheesesteaks in South Philly and laugh over who had picked the better spot. Other times they'd sit in Emmanuel's car for hours, listening to old school R&B and talking about everything under the stars. The morning after Daphne stayed at Emmanuel's for the first time, she woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, painting the walls in warm hues. She could hear him humming a tune in the kitchen. Curious, she grabbed the blanket and wrapped it around herself before heading to the small kitchen. There he was, shirtless, wearing gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, flipping pancakes with one hand while holding a cup of coffee in the other. "You cook?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. Emmanuel turned, flashing her a grin. "A little, but don't get used to it. I'm just trying to impress you." She laughed, shaking her head as she took a seat at the small dining table. "Well, consider me impressed." He slid a plate in front of her, perfectly golden pancakes, crispy bacon, and eggs scrambled with cheese. "Breakfast of champions," he declared. Daphne raised an eyebrow. "You always this smooth?" "Only when I like somebody," he replied, his tone softening. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and she found herself smiling despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. That breakfast marked the beginning of their routine. Emmanuel would call her after work, sometimes just to hear her voice. She'd tease him about his need for constant attention, but deep down she loved it. They found joy in the mundane, grocery shopping together, watching old movies on the couch, even folding laundry side by side. Daphne met Emmanuel's family a month later during a cookout. His niece, a precocious 6-year-old named Amaya, immediately latched onto Daphne, dragging her around the yard to show off her toys. Emmanuel's mom, Miss Janice, was warm and welcoming, her no-nonsense demeanor softened by the obvious pride she felt for her son. "She's a good one," Miss Janice said to Emmanuel when Daphne stepped away to grab a drink. "I know," he replied, his eyes following Daphne as she laughed with Amaya. "I'm trying not to mess it up." Meanwhile, Emmanuel charmed Daphne's family at her cousin's birthday party in Philly. Her aunts tried to grill him about his intentions, but he held his own, answering their questions with a mix of humor and honesty. By the end of the night, even her mother, who was notoriously hard to please, had given her stamp of approval. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One night, as they were hanging out at Emmanuel's apartment, Daphne noticed a text flash across his phone screen. It was from a woman named Tasha. "You gonna get that?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. Emmanuel glanced at the screen, then shrugged. "It's nothing, just a friend." Daphne raised an eyebrow. "A friend who's texting you at midnight?" He sighed, setting his phone down. "You don't have to worry about her, Daph. I'm here with you." She nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The first argument they had was over something small, Emmanuel forgetting to call her back after work. But it quickly escalated. "You're always so busy," Daphne snapped. "It's like I'm not even a priority." "Are you serious right now?" Emmanuel shot back. "I'm out here working my ass off to keep everything together, and you're mad because I didn't call you for 5 minutes?" The tension simmered for hours, but by morning they'd made up, their apologies whispered between kisses. Despite the bumps in the road, their relationship continued to deepen. Within a year, they moved into a modest apartment together in Camden. Life wasn't perfect. They argued about money, chores, and their busy schedules, but their love seemed to outweigh the struggles.